Normally, I play clips of The View just to point out how idiotic their politics actually are. However, something interesting happened in this segment. They're actually being reasonable and thoughtful about government for a change. So I want to go ahead and highlight this because why the heck not? But before we get to these clips, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe on this video so we can break through the algorithms. Here we go.
I fear that we will not have an election in 2028. I really mean that in the core of my soul, unless we wake up to the code red, what's happening in this country, and we wake up soberly to how serious this moment is.
So if you're worried about where the country is heading, you're not alone. 79% of American voters that think that the U.S. is in a state of political crisis, and more than half think democracy isn't working. It's funny, under Obama and Biden, it was working. All of a sudden, it's not working. Gee, what happened?
I don't know that that's what the poll says.
I know, but I'm saying it. I'm saying that.
I disagree with what Gavin Newsom said, that he doesn't think we're going to have elections in 2028. And I think I have a different thought on this poll. But listen, democracies are fragile. We all have to be invested in them. But I think they bend. I don't think it's going to break. I still think this is the best form of government in the history of mankind.
It certainly is.
Proud to live in a democratic republic. But what I will say is I think this is more a reaction to people feeling like the system doesn't work for them. Millennials were the first generation that was likely to not do better than their parents were. The fact that people are working harder than ever and not being able to get ahead, and they feel like the American dream is unattainable. They just feel like the system that Washington is giving us doesn't work. I don't tie this to...
You're talking about an economic... We're not talking about democracy. It's completely different.
I think that people throw around the term democracy. I think Democrats totally overcalculated this last election. At the end of the day, if it's a Tuesday morning, you're deciding what bill you can afford to pay, you're not voting on democracy. You're voting on the cost of living. It's a nebulous term. It just doesn't mean enough to people. I think people are frustrated with the cost of living, and they're frustrated with the environment.
I think it didn't mean enough to people because they had forgotten how bad Trump was. I think it meant a lot to people in 2020 when Joe Biden was first running, because we were just, surviving that first Trump term. I think if somebody was running now against Trump, when people have been painfully reminded of what an authoritarian he is, it would be very different. But I also think that the reason people don't feel democracy is working is because our system is supposed to work through a system of checks and balances. And today, unfortunately, there are no checks and balances. The Congress is a fickle organization of rubber stamping Republicans that do zero oversight over the abuses of the Trump administration. And the courts have no enforcement mechanism. So they can issue judicial orders, but they don't have the teeth to be able to enforce them.
The courts have intervened against Trump numerous times. I think the courts have largely held, our founders intended for them to work slowly.
The court said not to deport Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and they did.
And he is back now, and that was the system working. But
months and months afterwards.
I'm going to say something that's going to make
frustrated.
This table and this audience very upset, but I want to tell the unvarnished truth. I think if the election were reheld today, Donald Trump would win by the same, if not a bigger margin. I think we forget this country.
How do you say that, though?
This country is so deeply polarized. If you hated him before, you hate him even more now. There are definitely people who are like, ooh, I'm having some buyer's remorse. But there's this poll today that shows that on the top issues people voted on, they still trust Republicans more. We are literally a 48-48 country, and then this little percentage in the middle that goes either way.
I would be curious who this poll, the age of the poll, because I think this probably gears younger in who is saying that, because anyone who has read their history books since the beginning of time, democracy may be fragile, it is the only way. You do not want a theocracy. You do not want a monarchy. You do not want socialism or communism. They have never worked. In intention and spirit, they sound great, but go back to the books, because that will not end well.
Don't you think that democratic socialism works in the Scandinavian countries?
But think of that. Sweden's the size of New Jersey. We are a giant, massive, diverse, socioeconomically, racially. We're a very different country.
It's hard to compare the two, honestly, Joy. So I don't mind Governor Newsom's approach, but he's really not my style in general. He was at one point. He's veered a little bit as he dabbled into podcasts and going on. Some of the ways he was talking with people, I think you can have robust disagreements and still not cave to everything. And if you listen to some of those, it changed my tune on him a little bit. This is why I'm a big proponent for Governor Wes Moore. I love Senator Alyssa Slotkin. I love Representative Sara McBride. Their style of speech, they are so solid in who they are, and they're not changing to play someone else's game.
So apparently when Whoopi and Sunny are both absent from the Views panel, they become a bit more reasonable, although just barely, because you have Sarah Haines over here saying, hey, guess what? The new future political leaders that she likes includes Sara McBride, Big Bobby Sara McBride, right? A man pretending to be a woman. And if she thinks that's the next political leader of the Democrat Party, then she doesn't understand why the Democrats lost back in 2024. But then, of course, you also have Ana Navarro saying, oh, people just don't remember how bad Donald Trump was when he was president the first time. No, we were living through awful times with Joe Biden, and we remember Donald Trump's economy very fondly, the rule of law very fondly. And it wasn't, of course, until 2020 when the economy was ruined thanks to the shutdowns and pandemic that everything turned awry. Okay, so Ana Navarro still doesn't quite understand that point. But of course, we also have to talk about Gavin Newsom and his fear-mongering, right? We're not going to have elections in 2028 because Donald Trump's going to be a dictator. And of course, he says all this to elicit a certain type of response from the radical left. And that response, of course, we've seen played out in recent days with some horrible actions and ramifications. But of course, the main topic of this whole segment is the Quinnipiac poll that says that 79% of Americans think we are in a political crisis. But of course, the problem is that question is not expounded upon. Why is it a political crisis? Because I personally believe all the way back in 2020, we had a huge political crisis when it came to our voting and voting machines and mail-in ballots and ballot harvesting, right? I think that was a huge political crisis. So what do they actually mean by that? And the question is not particularly parsed out. And of course, something else they point out is that you have 53% saying that, guess what? Democracy seems to be failing. And once again, what's the reason behind that? Well, if you actually look at the poll over here, you can see that, yes, 53% say that democracy is not working in this country. But on a follow-up question down here, you'll notice that 59% blame Republicans. But of course, what does it all come back to? It comes down to who won the last election and what side of the aisle you happen to be on. Because if you look over here at these numbers, Republicans, 74% think democracy is working, and Democrats, 74% think democracy is not working. Okay, so yes, you basically have this inversion between the two parties. Whether you win or whether you lose, that determines how you feel about the current political climate in the country. But then you also have the swing of independents where 61% of them also think that democracy is not working. However, when you go back down to these numbers, you'll notice that both parties being claimed, 20 and 23%, is a pretty even split. So I'd be willing to wager that those are the independent voters. But of course, aside from all of that, the big worries of the day, as Alyssa Griffin, who ends up being a big voice of reason in this segment, points out, guess what? Republicans are still mostly trusted on the big issues. You have the economy, you have the border, and you have law and order, right? Those are the things Republicans lead on still after all of this time. Now, of course, millennials and the younger generation, they haven't been feeling optimistic about the future because, yes, prices have risen considerably, and I do wish Donald Trump would focus more on that to try to bring prices down and stop inflation. However, he is enacting his agenda, and so far, it seems not to be making anything worse, although I wish it was, honestly, making things a heck of a lot better. And these things take time, although I wish it wouldn't take this long. So, of course, as a result, you have younger people not favoring democracy as much and turning to things like socialism and communism, as you've seen with mamdani, etc. And one thing I do want to point out is that, yes, we do use the word democracy over and over and over again. I'm guilty of this myself, even though we all know we're a constitutional republic. But that being said, okay, socialism and communism always rise when your working class people feel like they can't get ahead and live a nice life. That's when all of these other ideas start to creep back up. And this is where, of course, Sara Haines actually makes a really good point. Looking at the history of the entire world, socialism and communism never end well. And this, of course, is something that has conveniently been left out of the history classes at all of these left-wing institutions because guess what? Because all of these professors actually believe in these economic and political systems. So I was really surprised to hear Sara Haines actually push back and say, yeah, these are not good ideas. These are not good systems of government that we want to follow with, okay? But Joy Behar, in her ignorance, is going to go ahead and say, well, what about all of the democratic socialist countries in Europe? There are none. Okay, what you have is free countries where they have high taxes to pay for a lot of social programs, right? Because socialism, whether it's democratic or not, means they are controlling the means of production. The government owns everything, whether it's the companies or the TV stations, etc., and all that really ends up doing is stifling innovation, stifling money creation, stifling your ability to live a good life. And of course, the history books all all back this up. But of course, Joy Behar has apparently been brainwashed by the AOCs and Bernie Sanders of the world, which of course is what's happening in New York City with mamdani, who's only going to turn out to be a huge detriment for the Democrat Party in the future, which of course to me is really good news, but it's also really bad news for the city of New York. They just don't see that freight train coming just yet. So like I said, this was a rather interesting little exchange on The View where you had some common sense seep in on this otherwise unwatchable show. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and say hi to your mom for me. Do you like t-shirts? Of course you do. And now you can support the channel by buying an Angry Teacher t-shirt designed by me, Angry Teacher. So if you like America, if you like freedom, if you like liberty, then go ahead and click the link in the description where all designs, of course, are 100% mother approved. So enjoy yourself and find something you like today.